38 ships stranded. Not by a storm, not by a mechanical failure, but by a nation that just found out its closest partner was feeding secrets to its greatest enemy. India thought it was quiet enough, careful enough, but in the Persian Gulf, nothing stays hidden for long. And now, 38 vessels are sitting motionless in the water, while the world holds its breath, wondering who gets punished next. Welcome to Currency Archive. If you've been with us for a while, you already know we don't do headlines here. We do the story behind the headline. Now, before we go any further, if you haven't subscribed yet, do me a favor. Think of it like this. You wouldn't leave the house without locking the door, would you? Don't leave this channel without hitting that subscribe button. It takes 1 second, protects you from missing what's coming next. And tell me something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your country, down in the comments. I want to see just how far this story has reached. Now, let's get into what's really happening. On a quiet morning, somewhere in the Persian Gulf, 38 Indian cargo ships came to a sudden stop. They did not stop because of engine failure. They did not stop because of bad weather. They stopped because Iranian forces moved in and blocked their path, deliberately, precisely, and without any prior warning to the crews on board. For the sailors on those vessels, the confusion was immediate. For the governments watching from a distance, the message was crystal clear. This was not an accident. This was a statement. The Persian Gulf is not just a body of water. It is the single most important maritime corridor on the planet. Every single day, millions of barrels of oil pass through it. Billions of dollars in goods move through it. Global supply chains depend on it. And on this particular day, Iran decided to use it as a weapon. Tehran did not stay silent for long. Iranian officials came forward with a direct accusation, one that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles across the world. They accused India of betrayal, not a minor diplomatic disagreement, not a trade dispute, a full direct accusation of betrayal, the kind of language that governments use when they believe a partner has crossed an unforgivable line. According to Tehran, India had provided intelligence or logistical assistance to the United States military. And that assistance, Iranian officials claimed, was used to help an American submarine locate and destroy a major Iranian Navy vessel. Let that sink in for a moment. If the accusation is true, India did not simply lean toward Washington in a political disagreement. India allegedly helped the United States military eliminate an Iranian warship. That is not a policy shift. That is an act of war by proxy. The destroyed Iranian vessel was not a small patrol boat. It was a significant military asset, one that Iran had deployed as part of its naval presence in the region. Losing it was not just a military setback, it was a humiliation, and Tehran responded the only way it believed would send a proportional message. It went after what India values most in that region, its commercial fleet. 38 vessels, stranded, crews unable to move, cargo sitting idle, every hour costing money, every day deepening the crisis. The Iranian forces that carried out the blockade were not acting impulsively. The operation showed clear coordination. The ships were identified, tracked, and stopped with precision. This was not a patrol that stumbled upon Indian vessels by accident. This was a planned response to what Iran believes was a planned betrayal. For observers watching the situation develop, one thing became immediately obvious. Iran had done its homework. Now, India has not confirmed the accusations. New Delhi has not publicly admitted to sharing any intelligence with Washington. Indian officials have responded carefully, using the kind of measured diplomatic language that reveals very little while buying time for negotiations behind closed doors. But silence in geopolitics is rarely innocent. The fact that India has not issued a strong, direct denial, the kind that governments issue when an accusation is completely false, has not gone unnoticed by analysts tracking the situation. Instead, what the world is watching is a quiet scramble. Indian officials rushing to open back-channel communications with Tehran, diplomats working urgently to secure the safe passage of those 38 ships. That is not the behavior of a country that has been falsely accused. What makes this moment truly significant is not just the blockade itself, it is what the blockade represents. For 30 years, India built its foreign policy on a very deliberate foundation. Stay close to everyone, commit to no one, maintain deep ties with Washington while keeping Tehran as a key energy partner. Never be forced into a corner, never be made to choose. That foundation cracked the moment those 38 ships stopped moving. India was forced to choose. And according to Iran, it already did. The ships sitting motionless in the Persian Gulf are not just a logistical problem. They are the visible consequence of an invisible decision, one made quietly, somewhere behind closed doors, that has now spilled out into one of the most watched waterways on Earth. The story is only beginning. There is an old saying in diplomacy, you can have many friends, but you cannot serve many masters. For 30 years, India ignored that warning. And for 30 years, it worked. India built one of the most sophisticated balancing acts in modern geopolitical history. It bought oil from Iran while signing defense deals with the United States. It maintained warm relations with Tehran while quietly deepening military cooperation with Washington. It sat at every table, committed to none, and profited from all. The world watched and called it strategic genius. Then came the Persian Gulf, and everything unraveled in a single decision. To understand how India arrived at this moment, one must go back to the foundation of its foreign policy, a principle that New Delhi has proudly defended for decades, known formally as strategic autonomy. The concept is simple on the surface. India does not join alliances. India does not take sides. India protects its own interests by keeping every powerful nation close enough to be useful, but never close enough to demand loyalty. It was a policy built for a world where conflicts stayed contained and powers competed through economics and diplomacy. It was not built for a world where a submarine destroys an Iranian warship and someone needs to answer for it. That world has now arrived. The relationship between India and Iran was never just political. It was deeply economic and deeply personal to millions of people on both sides. Iran was one of India's most important oil suppliers for decades. At its peak, India was importing tens of millions of barrels of Iranian crude every single year. The energy was cheap, the supply was reliable, and the relationship served both nations well. Indian refineries were specifically configured to process Iranian oil. Entire supply chains were built around that partnership. Beyond oil, the two countries shared infrastructure ambitions. The Chabahar port project, a major Indian investment on Iranian soil, was designed to give India a direct trade route into Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan entirely. It was one of the most strategically valuable projects New Delhi had ever undertaken outside its own borders. India had too much to lose in Iran to simply walk away, and yet, here they are. The pressure on India did not arrive overnight. It built slowly, quietly over years, as the conflict between the United States and Iran moved from diplomatic tension toward open military confrontation. Washington made its expectations clear. Countries that wanted access to American markets, American technology, and American military partnerships would need to distance themselves from Tehran. The message was never delivered as an ultimatum in public. It did not need to be. Every government in the world understood what was being communicated. India resisted longer than most. It continued purchasing Iranian oil even after American sanctions tightened. It continued developing Chabahar even as Washington raised objections. It continued insisting that its foreign policy was its own, sovereign, independent, non-negotiable. But resistance has a cost, and that cost kept rising. Then came the moment that changed everything. The details remain officially unconfirmed, but the accusation from Tehran is specific enough to suggest it is not built on speculation. Iranian officials claim that India provided intelligence, precise, actionable intelligence, that allowed an American submarine to locate and destroy a significant Iranian naval asset. If that is true, it means India did not simply tilt toward Washington in a policy document or a diplomatic statement. It means India participated, directly or indirectly, in a military operation against a country it had called a partner for 3 decades. That is not a policy adjustment. That is a fundamental transformation, one that India may not have fully anticipated the consequences of. Because here is what New Delhi apparently miscalculated. Iran has been navigating hostile geopolitics for over 40 years. It has survived American sanctions, Israeli operations, internal pressure, and regional isolation. It has developed an extraordinary ability to identify threats and to respond to them in ways that are painful, precise, and impossible to ignore. 38 stranded ships are Iran's response. And the message embedded in that response is directed not just at India, but at every nation currently watching from the sidelines, quietly calculating whether it is safe to pick a side. India picked one. Now the entire world is watching what happens next. Most people think wars are fought with missiles. The most dangerous ones are fought with something far quieter. They are fought with blocked ports, stranded ships, empty shelves, and the slow, suffocating pressure of a global supply chain that suddenly stops moving. Not because of a bomb, but because of a decision made in a war room that most people will never hear about. Iran just made that decision. And the world is only beginning to understand what it means. The Persian Gulf is not simply a regional waterway. It is the circulatory system of the global economy. Roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through it every single day. Trillions of dollars in goods, commodities, and raw materials move through its corridors every single year. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point at its mouth, is just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles that the entire industrialized world depends on, whether it knows it or not. When that corridor is healthy, the global economy breathes normally. When something disrupts it, even partially, even temporarily, the effects ripple outward with extraordinary speed. Shipping costs rise, insurance premiums spike, delivery timelines collapse, and businesses that built their entire supply chains around reliable passage through those waters suddenly find themselves exposed in ways they never planned for. 38 Indian ships just made that risk visible in real time. Consider what those vessels were carrying. Cargo ships operating in the Persian Gulf corridor typically move petroleum products, industrial machinery, chemical compounds, consumer goods, and agricultural commodities. Each vessel represents not just a single shipment, but an entire chain of commitments, contracts with buyers, delivery deadlines with manufacturers, financial instruments tied to the timely arrival of goods. When 38 ships stop moving simultaneously, the damage does not stay contained to those vessels. It spreads. Buyers who were expecting shipments begin activating contingency clauses. Insurance companies start reassessing their exposure across the entire region. Shipping companies operating nearby routes begin quietly rerouting their vessels, adding days, sometimes weeks, to delivery timelines. And the cost of every future shipment through that corridor rises because the risk premium just increased for everyone. This is how an economic weapon works. It does not need to destroy anything. It simply needs to create enough uncertainty that the system starts damaging itself. Iran understands this mechanism better than almost any nation on Earth. For over 4 decades, Tehran has operated under some of the most severe economic sanctions ever imposed on a country. It has watched the United States use financial systems, trade restrictions, and maritime pressure as instruments of foreign policy. And in that time, Iran has studied carefully, learning not just how to survive economic warfare, but how to deploy it. The blockade of 38 Indian ships is not a desperate reaction. It is a demonstration of capability. Tehran is showing the world that it does not need to fire a missile to cause serious economic damage. It does not need to mine the Strait of Hormuz or directly confront a naval power. It simply needs to stop the right ships at the right moment and let the financial consequences do the rest. The timing is not coincidental. Global supply chains are already operating under significant strain. Disruptions across multiple transit routes over the past several years have left logistics networks with far less redundancy than they once had. Shipping companies have spent years rebuilding after previous shocks. Inventory buffers at major ports are thinner than historical averages. In this environment, a blockade of 38 vessels in one of the world's most critical corridors does not just create a local problem. It lands on a system that is already fragile, and fragile systems break faster than healthy ones. The businesses most immediately exposed are those with just-in-time supply chains. Manufacturers, retailers, and energy companies that operate with minimal inventory buffers and maximum dependence on predictable delivery schedules. For those businesses, every additional day those ships remain stranded is not just an inconvenience. It is a direct financial loss. But the deeper danger is not what is happening today. It is what this moment signals about tomorrow. Iran has now demonstrated, publicly, visibly, undeniably, that it is willing and able to use the Persian Gulf as an economic pressure point against nations it considers hostile. That demonstration will not be lost on the shipping companies, energy traders, and multinational corporations that move goods through that region every single day. Risk models will be updated. Insurance premiums will rise, alternative routes will be explored, and the cost of doing business in the Persian Gulf, already elevated by years of regional tension, just increased for every player in the market. That is precisely what Iran intended. Because the goal was never just to punish India. The goal was to send a message loud enough that every boardroom, every government ministry, and every shipping operation with exposure to the Persian Gulf would hear it clearly. Choose your side carefully. Because in this conflict, the sea itself has become a weapon. There's a moment in every major geopolitical shift when the old rules stop working. Not gradually, not with warning, all at once. The world just witnessed one of those moments, and most people are still looking at the surface, counting ships, tracking cargo, calculating delivery delays. They are focused on the symptom while missing the diagnosis entirely. The 38 stranded Indian vessels are not the story. They are the warning. Decode Iran's message carefully, because it was not written for India alone. Tehran did not block 38 ships simply to punish New Delhi for an intelligence leak. If punishment were the only objective, there are quieter, more diplomatic ways to deliver it. Iran chose a public, visible, economically disruptive response for a very specific reason. It wanted an audience. And right now, that audience includes every nation that shares a border with conflict, every government that buys Iranian oil, every country that has been quietly cooperating with American or Israeli military operations while publicly claiming neutrality, and every business that moves goods through the Persian Gulf believing that commerce exists in a separate world from geopolitics. Iran's message is direct, that separation no longer exists. The countries most immediately vulnerable to the same treatment are not difficult to identify. They are the ones walking the same tightrope India walked, maintaining economic relationships with Tehran while simultaneously deepening defense and intelligence cooperation with Washington. Several Gulf-adjacent nations, multiple Asian economies, and a handful of European states have been managing exactly this kind of dual exposure for years. They watched India do it successfully for 3 decades. They modeled their own approaches on New Delhi's playbook. And now they are watching that playbook fail in real time. 38 ships at a time. The recalculations happening in foreign ministries and corporate boardrooms right now are not being announced publicly, but they are happening. Quietly, urgently, with a level of seriousness that the public statements from these governments will never fully reflect. For the global business community, the implications extend far beyond the Persian Gulf itself. The concept of a safe trade route is being fundamentally redefined. For decades, international shipping operated on a foundational assumption. The commercial vessels, regardless of their flag or cargo, existed in a protected category. That conflicts between nations would be contained to military and diplomatic channels, and that trade would continue flowing even when governments were at war. That assumption has been quietly eroding for years, but the blockade of 38 Indian ships marks a significant acceleration of that erosion. Businesses that have not yet built contingency plans for Persian Gulf disruption are now operating with a risk profile they have not properly priced. Supply chains routed through the region without alternative pathways are exposed. Energy contracts dependent on uninterrupted Gulf passage carry embedded geopolitical risk that most financial models have not fully accounted for. The companies that understand this first will adapt. The ones that do not will absorb the consequences when the next disruption arrives. And based on the current trajectory of regional tensions, the next disruption is not a distant hypothetical. There is a deeper strategic reality that this entire episode forces into the open. The era of profitable neutrality is ending. For a generation of nations and businesses, the global order allowed a comfortable middle position. Trade with everyone, align with no one, profit from all sides. That position was sustainable as long as the major powers were willing to tolerate it, as long as conflicts remained contained, as long as the costs of neutrality stayed low. None of those conditions hold today. The conflict arc running through the Persian Gulf, involving the United States, Iran, Israel, and now an expanding circle of nations being pulled in, is not moving toward resolution. It is intensifying. And as it intensifies, the pressure on every nation currently trying to maintain a neutral position will increase accordingly. India's experience is not a unique misfortune. It is a preview. For the young entrepreneurs and business leaders who form the core of this conversation, the strategic takeaway is not abstract. It is operational. It is immediate. And it demands a response. Supply chains built on the assumption of stable Gulf passage need redundancy built into them, now, not after the next disruption. Energy sourcing strategies that depend on a single corridor need diversification. Investment portfolios with concentrated exposure to Persian Gulf trade routes need rebalancing against a risk environment that is permanently shifted. The businesses that will navigate this era successfully are not the ones waiting for stability to return. They are the ones building for instability as the baseline condition, treating disruption not as an exception to be managed, but as the permanent operating environment to be planned for. 38 Indian ships are still sitting in the Persian Gulf. Their crews are waiting, their cargo is waiting. Their governments are negotiating behind closed doors, hoping to find a resolution that does not require admitting publicly what may have already happened privately. But the larger story, the one that matters for every nation, every business, and every decision maker watching this unfold, is already written. The Persian Gulf is no longer just a trade route. It is a pressure point, a message board, a place where geopolitical decisions made in intelligence offices and war rooms translate directly into economic consequences, felt by businesses, supply chains, and ordinary people thousands of miles away. Iran just proved it controls that pressure point. And the world, whether it is ready to admit it or not, just received the most expensive lesson in modern geopolitics. Trade is no longer separate from war. In the Persian Gulf, they have become the same thing.